I'm very honored and excited to be here and to engage in this rich conversation that we're going to have. I think that framing our entire conversation is the article that you recently wrote with Father Jim Keenan, Dr. Landrigan, in which you describe how disparities have become painfully apparent in the COVID-19 pandemic for low-income communities. And how part of what I loved of what you said in there, that this is also our call for society reflection and action. I'm hoping that you might be able to give us an overview of the article, some of the points that you make, so that they can be the frame for our conversation.
Okay, well, thank you, Jimena, and it's great to be here with you and Father Octavio and Father Paul. So I come at this from my background as a medical doctor, trained in pediatrics and also as a public health physician. I worked for many years for the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, in Atlanta before I came back to Boston College. And whenever there's a pandemic like this, I'm trained as an epidemiologist to look at the distribution of the disease in the population, because no matter what disease you're talking about, anything from the common cold to cancer, it never affects all people in a population equally. It affects different people disproportionately, and there's always reasons why. And if you understand firstly the pattern of disease, and then secondly, if you can unearth the underlying structures that account for that pattern, then you're empowered to be able to take rational action to do something about it. So in looking at the COVID-19 pandemic, this paper, which I wrote with Father Jim Keenan, who's a Jesuit at Boston College, the Vice Provost for International Engagement, and Lillian Ferrer, who's a nurse by training. She's the Vice Rector of the Pontifical Catholic University in Chile, in Santiago, Chile. And as we look at the distribution, at the pattern of disease and death from COVID-19, it becomes very obvious very quickly that certain segments of the population are hit disproportionately hard. And nobody is harder hit than minority and marginalized populations. That's true in this country, and it's true in pretty much every country around the world. But we focus especially on the US experience because of what we know best. And as we delved into it, we came to realize that this uneven, this unfairly, this disproportionately heavy burden of COVID on minority and marginalized communities reflects longstanding disparities. It didn't come out of nowhere. So there have been economic differences which have actually gotten worse and wider between rich and poor in the past several decades. There are differences in housing, in access to medical care, in disposable income, which allows them to purchase medical care. And most recently, since we wrote the article, it's become obvious that there are disparities in access to the vaccine, at least in some states. And we noted further that these disparities are widening, that the policies, especially policies in the United States over the last 4 years, policies ongoing currently in some other countries like Brazil, are causing these disparities to become even greater, so that the poor are becoming poorer, the rich are becoming richer. Regressive tax policies are part of the burden. They have the impact of decreasing purchasing power and real wages for the poor while increasing wealth at the top of the pyramid. And as we looked at these disparities through, as scholars at Boston College and a Catholic research university, we look at them through two lenses. On the one hand, you can look at it scientifically and say, yep, the rates of disease are 3 or 4 times higher in poor minority people than other people. But you also look at it through the lens of ethics and morality, and you realize that this is much more than just biology at work. This is the playing out, this disproportionate pattern of disease is the playing out, it's the elaboration of longstanding differences that have existed for literally for centuries in the United States, and some of which can trace their origins quite directly back to slavery. And so when you look at these disparities in disease through that lens of ethics and morality, you realize that what we're seeing here is what we refer to in this paper as structural evils. These are not morally neutral constructs at all. These constructs are the outward manifestation of deliberate decisions that have been made over the decades, even over the centuries, by political leaders, which basically institutionalize evil, institutionalize immorality within our society. And we thought that that was a fairly strong statement, but we thought we had to put it out there. We also talked in the paper about remedies, things that one might do to address the situation, but maybe I'll hold that for now. It seems to me that the remedies could come better at the end of this conversation. And let me leave it where I put it there for now, that these disparities are very real, they're very profound, and they reflect deep standing injustices within our society. So back to you, Jimena.
And I love the way that you're holding off to the recommendations that you made. I think that was exactly sort of the flow that I wanted for this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to both Father Octavio and Father Paul to see how, if you all could describe your parishes a little bit and explain for us what types of issues you have seen in the communities that you serve, and what observations have you all made during the pandemic?
Do I go first?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I here at St. Anthony in New Bedford, I have a large Spanish-speaking community, mostly people from Guatemala, El Salvador, Central America. And the things that I have noticed after, with the pandemic is that it has affected family life in different ways. As you know, rent is very high for many families here. It's very expensive. The amount of money that they make to pay for rent is not really that much, and so that affects other areas of their family life, how they put food on the table. For example, here at St. Anthony, we have a food pantry, and I started to see families that before the pandemic will not show up for the food pantry, but with the pandemic, they started to come because they didn't have the means to, perhaps to pay for food or other things. And also, for example, daycare for their children, right? They cannot afford the same way as wealthy people, I guess, can afford daycare for their children. And so they have to stay home, and it is like a chain effect or domino effect in their lives, right? And I could see that affecting at least, families in my parish in a big way. And so I could see that. And besides that, the emotional, spiritual distress, because that affects the whole life, and I was able to see that, and we have been trying to address that, helping them, in different ways spiritually, opening the church as much as we can for them to pray, trying to provide food and shelter to those in need, and so those are some of the things that we have. I have noticed. And we have been trying to address with the Hispanic community here, Spanish-speaking community in our parish.
Great, thank you so much. How about you, Father Paul?
So I'll do it from sort of what the situation is, and then briefly what I think four main realities are that we've been facing. And I won't get into what we've been doing, but hopefully that's the next part. So Lawrence is a city that's about 80,000 people on the New Hampshire border. It is 75% Hispanic, the plurality of whom are Dominican. The culture is really driven by Dominican culture. It's the economically poorest city in Massachusetts. About 30% of people live below the poverty line, about 40% of children under age 18. Average per capita income is a little bit over $17,000. We have at least 2/3 of our families are single parent families, a galaxy of social ills at all times and the best of times, one measure of which is that at any given time in Lawrence, 75% of children are at risk for hunger. So this is the extreme of social and economic poverty in Massachusetts in the best of times. During COVID, the four things I'd highlight today are: number one, the health crisis. And Dr. Landrigan, I would imagine that this parallels what you've written about. The 80,000 people, basically population. As of yesterday, 17,995 residents were confirmed tested positive. So 23% of people officially tested positive, whatever the real number would be. That's extraordinary. And if you don't live in an inner city area, just imagine what that would be like hopefully you live in a much nicer place. 1 out of every 4 people guaranteed is positive in every encounter that you have. So we're dealing with the immediate care issues of all of those people, a crisis, and then the reality of the public health spread. It's spreading so much here, not because it has spread so much here, not because people are being lazy, but because people largely live in very crowded living conditions. They work frontline jobs. They don't have a choice not to work economically. And they also work often in jobs in which employers are not paying any attention to COVID health regulations, where employers are saying, when employees say, people are positive in there, the employers say, well, get in there and stop talking about this COVID stuff. So the crisis is, I'm living with 8 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, and anybody who comes in with this virus is going to affect possibly everybody. So that's number one. Number two, the economic impact, we can't get our hands around it. Unemployment here officially was as high as 33.1%, and it was June or July. So again, an economically impoverished community in the best of times, 1/3 of people officially out of work. Just there are 1,001 issues around that. And just think about that hunger reality. Best of times, 3 out of 4 kids are at risk for hunger every single day. Adding to this, nobody can get their mind or their arms around that. Third, a crisis has been education. And I mean this really gently and with huge respect for everybody in public education. Remote learning done by the very best, most dedicated public school teachers has largely been a disaster in inner city America. It's because of the whole complexity of people's lives. In my community, if you're a single mom with 3 kids or 4 kids who has to work, and you've got those kids, abuela, taking care of the kids, and she's from the Campo in the Dominican Republic, I don't know how to share a screen on Zoom. I mean, I do now, but she doesn't know what a computer is. She's responsible for overseeing these kids. It has been a disaster. The numbers we read about the percentage of kids, and we're only reading a portion of it, in inner city America who have not shown up since last spring. There's no record of them since last spring. It is a profound crisis, education of children. And then lastly, then it's the spiritual. How do we bring all of this together? And you mix in here COVID plus the Black Lives Matter movement, the awakening in a new way of so many people in this country to issues of racial injustice. That really has mattered a great deal on the ground here in a community that is not largely politicized. It really, really has been a big deal, as well as the political upheaval in our country during the past year. So those 4 things to me, the health, the economics, the educational crisis, and then the spiritual realities, that's what our parish has been entering into during the past year.
Thank you both for sharing those numbers, those stories, those realities with us. I am wondering if looking at your parishes, right? I think that these realities existed pre-pandemic, like you had said, Dr. Landrigan, these have just exacerbated them. I was commenting with the planning committee that the Latino community tends to be a high contact community where we're very familial, we're very collectivistic, and this has certainly had an impact on our social and support system. How have you seen your parishes change in their idea of the role that you're playing vis-a-vis these issues that you're mentioning? Has it changed? Has it been the same mission and vision but just expanded? I'll let you start with that question of Father Octavio.
Yeah, you're right in saying that, you know, we are very close, we are very familial, and you know, we try to get support from one another in that way. And with the, you know, with the pandemic, that has been a struggle. Many families, you know, out of a sudden found themselves alone without any support, and that really takes a toll on them. You know, they really suffer, and I have to, you know, call them and try to ask them how you're doing. But you know, after a while I realized what was going on, because you don't see them, and you're not able to interact with them, and you start questioning what's going on, and then you realize that because they don't find that support now in church, you know, they feel alone and unable to communicate because they're afraid, they're panicking, they don't want to, you know, get infected, and that has been a real struggle in at least here in my parish, and you know, I've been trying to do the best I can to reach out to them and to little by little bring them back, to give them that sense of safety, and you know, so they can feel that support, that you know, closeness, and that's very, very important, you know, in for the families, for the children, and how they do in school and in church. And yeah, that's pretty much.
And Father Paul, I'll throw it over to you, because also what I'm hearing and what you're saying, Father Octavio, is that, and I'm picturing you picking up the phone and reaching out to all of your parishioners, and just me thinking of you all as just, this has been a big burden on your shoulders as well. And so where have you garnered support and energy and just the hours of the day to be able to reach out to those who are feeling more isolated? Father Paul.
So I do nothing. Our parishes, and again, the best times, we're several thousand people, and we're a trilingual parish. Most of the work in this community, the time, talent, treasure, is done by our parishioners, are really well-formed and large number, very dedicated parish volunteers. So for example, on the outreach, there's no way any priest or any lay leader could reach out to all of parishioners in a small or large. We've tried to really up our social media communications day by day, all of our existing television ministry, our print stuff, our email contacts with people, but we also have organized phone calls several times to everybody for whom we have a phone number. So that involves organizing large numbers of volunteers who might do 20 or 30 calls a piece. Those calls are so welcomed, particularly by seniors or anybody else who's isolated. So a strength that I would have recognized in the past was we have a lot of really good human contact. This has shown that you got to have some active means of communication, from an email address to WhatsApp to a mail address for everybody, and it cannot be taken for granted, particularly in a community where so many people transition as ours. So we just keep pedaling fast on those personal communications.
Have there been means of communication that have been more effective or that have worked best with your communities?
So for us, it really varies by person. For people who are older, there really are people who just do not have internet access or choose not to have that. So it comes down to phone or mail. For the Hispanic community, WhatsApp is much more valuable than any email that you'll ever send out, whether people get it or not. So we really go into each, the Anglo community, older, younger, Vietnamese. For Vietnamese, it happens to be phone calls. So we try to figure out what works to get the most numerous contacts.
Yeah, in our case, our parish Facebook page has been very, very useful to communicate with my parishioners and with older parishioners who perhaps don't have access or don't know how to access the internet. By means of volunteers that know them, can go to their houses and reach out to them. That's how we have been doing it.
That's great. As you're breaking down all of the different groups that you're outreaching to and continuing the sense of community that you build in your parishes, one of the groups that you mentioned, Father Paul, is youth, and how education right now has been out of reach for many of our young people. And I'm wondering what one of you has done, what the parish has done in order to continue that ministry with young people. I know that Father Paul, the Lawrence Catholic Academy, has seemed to manage the pandemic in a positive way. And I'm wondering if there's lessons learned that each one of you can share as to how you've been able to minister to young people.
So I'll give two that connect before the LCA one. So, and actually to back up to something I mentioned earlier, we have a place called the Cor Una Meal Center, which you've been to, Jimena, which is a big, beautiful restaurant that we built 15 years ago that serves free restaurant, breakfast, and dinner 365 days a year to anybody who's hungry in Lawrence. So sit-down dining room service. In a regular year, we serve about 250,000 meals. Since last March, we've had to shut down the dining room, obviously, and so we distribute those same restaurant meals as to-go meals every day for breakfast, every day for dinner. The morning after the shutdown last March by the governor of everything in the state, we served breakfast. That evening, we served dinner. We've never missed a meal for 15 years, and we haven't missed a meal in COVID. So for young people in this community and old people, but we're a predominantly young community, the number one outreach we have to one another is feeding one another. And in the economic mess that we've got, at least we know that this parish is feeding anybody in Lawrence who is hungry 365 days a year. If I thought that was important before COVID, boy, do I get it now. I do not have the financial resources, nor am I going to find them to meet the needs of a city that is undergoing 33% unemployment, but I can feed them all, anyone who needs to be fed. And the people who are working as volunteers during all of this are almost all under age 18, almost all. So that's not like, hey, the youth ministry program, and let's do a raffle. That is ministry for people of all ages, predominantly hungry young people by young people. Then secondly, and you may want to get back into it, Lawrence Catholic Academy is about a 400-person school we have for pre-K age 3 through grade 8. And it has operated from the get-go, the Monday after the shutdown last March, remotely for the last academic year, and then this year both in person and remotely. When we are told that everyone's going to die if you have in-person inner-city education, that is not true. We are running a super vibrant, very well-attended Catholic school, in-person and remote, with all the challenges involved through all of this. So for the education crisis, a parish is not going to solve the crisis for an entire city. But boy, we are successfully addressing it for at least a couple hundred kids and a couple thousand family members.
Thank you.
In our case, what we try to do is to implement what is called a family catechesis, virtual family catechesis. And so what we do, we try to bring parents to the parish and give them a lesson, give them some instructions. and then they go back and they teach their children. So at least with our catechism children. And so in that way, you know, if parents are at home, children are at home, if we can have everybody in person at the parish for catechism. So we try to have at least, you know, following the guidelines and all the safety policies and everything. We train the parents for a lesson, and then they go back. We prepare videos with some volunteers to do, you know, remotely. And that's how we have been trying to be in touch with the youth of our parish, so they continue to be catechized, so they don't lose the faith. Whenever we can, we have the youth meetings, you know, in reduced number, but we try to nevertheless do our best to reach out to them.
And Father Octavio, to jump onto that, similarly, we've done Osman Ospino, who's on the faculty at BC, and his wife, Guadalupe, are the directors of my Hispanic apostolate. They've put together this year an all virtual, it's actually a walk through the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So for every family, one chapter per week. They're online with an introductory session by video, a catechesis, something for everybody, and then there are take-home materials. And what we've switched is our catechists make phone calls each week to a group of families to be sure how they're doing and to support them in their needs. Then we've opened that to all parishioners too. It's for all ages. You know, not everybody is going to do this, but everybody can do it. And the personalized follow through with the catechist has fundamentally affirmed that we love you and we're with you. And whatever the numbers turn out to be, we have no control over that, but we're sharing the gospel and we're supporting as much as we can. And then when this crisis passes, then we pick up and we figure out where we are.
Yeah.
That's great. I want to note for the participants that are with us, if you have questions that you would like to ask, we're reserving the last 10 minutes of the webinar to ask those questions. You can put them in the Q&A that you will see at the bottom of your screen. So make sure that you keep putting them on, and then we will bring them to the panel at in the last 10 minutes. I wanted to ask you both also on a subject that you've both touched on, which is the spiritual care of all of your parishioners. And I love the way that you just finished that last sentence, Father Paul, in having an open parish where you know that you are known and you are loved and welcome, and that that invitation to come in has been communicated in various forms to all of the different participants. One of the things that was pointed out to me is that you have chosen to have an outdoor mass. What has that done for your parish, and how has it been welcomed by your parishioners, and what made you decide to go that route?
When we were shut down, I was standing on the deck above my garage looking over a vast parking lot that's behind our church and several of our buildings. And I thought, boy, we should just have mass outside. And then, you know, when I put down my martini, I thought, you know, we really should just have mass outside. So when the lockdown ended last year, the COVID numbers were so high in Lawrence, and they were nothing compared to where they got. We were as high as 240 for the average daily incidence rate in the red zone in like November, December. So we started in the summer when we could reopen, having a flatbed truck brought into the rear of that parking lot, blocking off the street that leads to it. And if you had to socially distance every single person 6 feet apart, which you don't if you're in the same household, in the space we have, you can fit 1,500 plus people. So we bring in a flatbed truck. We have a sanctuary on top of the truck, so it's visible from almost all of the space. We've got a concert quality sound system that a local DJ who had a huge conversion brought in for us, and then we ended up purchasing. We celebrate Mass outside. People bring their own chairs if they want chairs. They space as much as they want. You can be as much as a city block plus away from anyone else if you want to. We celebrate one Mass on Sunday in English, one in Spanish. And you know, in the good weather, we were up to as many as 700 people at those Masses, which we never would have been able to effectively do with all the precautions inside. we thought we'd be outdoor. So this was really welcomed. When it got really hot, maybe not so welcome, but we're still safe. No worries, no cleaning, no anxiety. It was one place everyone could come together. And during Black Lives Matters last summer, to be able to come together, to be with everybody and to talk about these issues collectively, it was a hugely powerful worship experience. And then, so we would have thought we'd be indoors by the winter. We didn't go indoors. We've not gone indoors. So we had a couple of really cold weekends, which if I had scripted this for community unity, you would have thrown them in because we made it through. So we will eventually go back indoors. I hope maybe by the summer or so if the numbers go down. But we have affirmed you can be safe. You can observe these social distancing protocols. You have to. And nothing keeps us from the Lord. Nothing keeps us from the Eucharist. Nothing keeps us from one another. I think it's been a big deal that COVID has not beat us. And we experience that in such a liberating way Sunday after Sunday.
In my case, once we were allowed to have mass and indoor mass following the restrictions. So what happened in New Bedford is that the mayor put a limit to 100 people, per mass, and my parish holds 1,900 people, and so following what at that time was the 25% capacity limit, I was still able to sit in my parish around 300 people with the spacing and everything. But when when the mayor, trying to be more cautious, he said only 100 people. So I said, I need to do something because, 100 people have more parishioners than that, and I need to be able to provide to them, the sacraments. And so what I decided to do is to just multiply the masses. And so at a given Sunday, I had 7 masses, and, with another priest and with permission from our bishop. So I was able to provide more masses and more opportunities for people, to come to mass following the guidelines, sacrament of confession as well. I told them you can always call me and we can set up a schedule, a meeting for confession. So I guess this was very helpful for people to feel that they were connected, and then because a lot of people, are still afraid to come to church, and many, I don't know if they will ever come back to church, but at least I try, to keep that connection by offering more masses, to the best of my ability by following the guidelines, and that's something that helped, and people realized, that we were trying to do our best to keep the church open, to provide the sacraments, and they were very, very appreciative of that.
And as I'm formulating my next question, I want to recognize that both of you have been doing extraordinary work with true hope and dedication to the Eucharist, to the work that you are both dedicated to doing with your communities. Dr. Landrigan, in your article, you made a powerful statement of this hope, and you challenged us to seize the moment of opportunity presented by the pandemic to make our societies just, sustainable, and resilient. And I ask each one of you, how do we build on this hope? And how do we as Catholics accompany those who need, like you said, Father Paul, we may live in different communities that look different than Lawrence has in this moment. What can we do to be each other, to be there for one another as Catholics, as human beings on this earth? And I can open that up to all three of you.
So, I mean, for me, a couple of weeks ago at one of our outdoor messes, a woman who's a senior leader in our community who went through COVID herself, and whose housemate also was still recovering from COVID, said, I have to tell you, like, I'm just not questioning my faith, but it's been weak in certain ways. I keep praying. I keep telling myself I know everything's going to be okay, but there's just this little part of me that, I know everything's going to be okay, but part of me questions that. And I said, do you need more data? I don't know if anything is going to be okay. That everything's going to be okay. You're kidding. It's not all going to, I hope it will be. And I'm working on this, but come on, that's the whole lesson here. I believe everything is going to be okay eternally. I believe in salvation. I believe what we need here is the love of Jesus Christ and to put it into practice now. And she was like, yeah, like that's the answer. I hope coming away from COVID, we realize everything is not going to necessarily be okay on this planet. Tell that to a Syrian refugee, tell that to someone in a concentration camp, but the kingdom is real. It begins now and it's going to be eternal. So I think if we really believe that, all the more we should celebrate. We're free of all this. All we have to do is love and do the work of love as best we can now. I don't know what all the results are going to be. I just know we have to do the work of building the kingdom, and I'm fully confident it's going to be eternal, and then everything is going to be okay.
Thank you.
Well, I think, as the saying goes that God knows how to draw good out of bad situations. I think this pandemic has helped a lot of people to grow stronger in their faith. I could see that in the number of confessions and how people really change in many ways. And for example, people that are better off were more mindful of poor parishioners in our parish, and so they will come up to me and say, "Father, you have this. I have this donation. Give it to a needy family in the parish." Or people calling, "Father, if there is anybody that needs anything, food, let me know." And so many people, was a chance for them to be awake to this reality that there are many brothers and sisters who are less fortunate than them. And so that was an eye-opening for them for the necessity to reach out to those in need. And so again, this pandemic has had some bad things, many people getting sick, people dying, but other people realize, how important it is to reach out to those in need and to share, because there are people who are really struggling. They don't have the same means in their lives. And so so that's something that we need to encourage in people, to reach out to those in need, to grow stronger in our charity for one another.
Dr. Landrigan, I'm going to bring the conversation back to you where you left us off at the beginning. The beginning and the end of our discussion in our framework. And you started with the realities that under-resourced communities have been impacted by the pandemic and things have been unveiled. What are some of your recommendations? What is some of the work that we can engage in as we move through this pandemic and forward?
Well, before I get into the specifics, I want to echo what Father Paul and Father Octavio said, is that we have seen, in the midst of this terrible pandemic, we have seen some extraordinary heroism and some deep signs of hope. Think of the healthcare workers. Think of the workers in those horrible meatpacking plants in Iowa and Wisconsin. Think of the men and women that get up every morning and drive the buses and the trolleys on the MTA, where they know that they're going to be in contact with people, but they understand that they're essential workers and that the doctors and nurses and everybody else who works in the hospital couldn't get to work without them. So that's heroism at a local, at an individual level. We've also, if you look around the world, we have seen countries that have responded extraordinarily well to this pandemic. Call it love in action, if you will. There are countries that quickly realized the looming disaster and put the right things in place. Typically, those were countries that already had the elements of a good public health structure, a robust educational structure, already in place. I mean, the problem that we've had in this country, which I trace politically back to approximately January 20th, 1981, is that we've just been systematically disinvesting in education, in the public health infrastructure, in a lot of the safety net dimension of American society for something like 4 decades. But there have been other countries that have not gone through that disinvestment. They have maintained those structures, and they have done remarkably well. Some of them have been rich countries like Germany, like Switzerland, but others have been very poor countries who just had the right pieces in place. I've worked some in Rwanda in Southeast Africa. Rwanda has with a very small budget, has a really robust public health system, and they've kept their case rates down to single digits, despite the fact that they're bordered on one side by the Congo and the other side by Tanzania and Uganda. And so it's possible to do it right. And so speaking as a physician, and I'll direct the things that I think we should do to what we need to do in public health. I think first of all, in public health and in society more generally, we have to build on the hope that we've seen. We have to build on the heroism. We really have to reinvest in public health systems at every level, at the local city level, at the state level, nationally. We have to restore some of those budgets. They need to hire. They need to restaff those. For example, in the city of Lawrence and the city of New Bedford, my guess is there's probably 1 or 2 nurses in the whole public health department today, whereas a generation ago there might have been 25 or 30 nurses. That's the kind of disinvestment that I'm talking about, and it's time for local, state, and national leaders to rebuild that infrastructure so that there'll be people who are trained in medicine and nursing who can supplement the work of the parish volunteers and do what needs to be done to keep body and soul together. There's also needs at the national level, and I don't want to get too political here, but I'm delighted with this bill that's going through Congress that's going to put money into the pockets of people who badly need it. Anything that we can do in this country to reduce economic inequity, anything that we can do to build up educational systems that give the next generation the chance to get ahead is all to the good. Speaking as a pediatrician, I can tell you that children who are malnourished in childhood, who are exposed to toxic chemicals like lead when they're little, are not going to have the learning capacity. They're not going to have the cognitive abilities. They're not going to have the IQ that they're going to need to progress in this knowledge-driven post-technological society that we're getting into these days. It's so important to educate kids and feed them and nourish them and keep them away from toxins early in life. And those are things that will help the people at the bottom of the economic ladder, but they'll also help the entire society. Because when you've got 10, 20, 30% of a society underfed, undereducated, underpaid, it pulls down the whole society, which is what we've seen here in COVID. Countries that have more equity than we do, a narrower gap between the rich and poor than we have in this country, have done far better than we have in the United States, where we have some extraordinarily wealthy people and then millions upon millions of people who have trouble putting bread on the table. So I think these are big fixes. They don't really speak to the spiritual needs, which I leave to my ecclesiastical colleagues, but it's the physical underpinnings that have to be put in place to enable the spiritual to take root and to grow.
Any final words, Father Octavio, Father Paul, before we go to the Q&A, as you're thinking about suggestions about how we hang on to this hope, to the silver linings, and ideas on how we can contribute to the great work that you and your parishioners are doing?
I'm ready for Q&A. I would just say, do not be afraid of anything. You know, we've realized as individuals, as families, as parishes, strengths and weaknesses during COVID. It would be very unfortunate if I realized the weaknesses of my parish and then I became afraid of those weaknesses. If I've got some insight into the weaknesses and some insight into what other places are doing that's working, forge ahead with the positive. Don't be afraid.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, Father. We need to just trust God and then move forward and have our arms open to the people and be of support to them, especially after this virus goes away. Many are questioning if people will come back. It all depends on how we try to be there for them. That we're open, we're not afraid, we trust God, and things will go back to normal, hopefully.
I want to thank every single one of you that is here for both opening our eyes to the disparities that were already in existence that have been highlighted by this pandemic, but also for the ray of hope and for the call to action to, like each one of you pointed, there are small steps of social justice calling that we can do every day, every week, every month, whatever it is that we have to share and to give, to call people in to not just our parishes, but into our faith and into our strong sense of doing the loving thing for others, for our neighbors, for anyone who's ailing, for anyone who needs our faith and hope. I think that is the perfect answer to the question that I was asking. How do we hang on to these silver linings, recognizing that these disparities exist, but also like you said, Dr. Landrigan, that there is much hope and much to look forward to and much work to do. So thank you all for participating in this, for sharing your knowledge, your best practices, your faith, and your absolute certainty that things are going to be okay.